The Book of Beginnings, Lesson 16, Covenant Complete. We've been going through for the last several sessions, starting with the 12th chapter of the book of Genesis, all the way through the 25th chapter. Really has to do with Abraham and the Abrahamic covenant. So tonight I'm going to try to I've got one scripture in this 22nd chapter, so we're going to go into the 23rd chapter. I'm going to jump the 24th chapter and share a scripture or two out of the 25th chapter to close out on, and hopefully you'll see why. If not, we'll take it from there. So, why do I say, you saw that the title I have here is Covenant Complete. What do I mean that the covenant is complete? What covenant am I speaking of? And then to get it started, what two major divisions do we have in our Bibles? What are they? Old Testament and New Testament. Why is it called a testament? Why is it Old Testament and New Testament? We'll answer the question. Old Covenant versus Old Testament, and New Covenant versus New Testament. And if you look at the definition there for this Greek word that I'm not going to try to butcher up, you'll see the last two things down here are covenant and testament. So covenant and testament are the same thing. They're the same. They mean the same thing. In other words, you could say it's not just, we think of the Old Testament, we think of a series of books. We think of the New Testament, we think of a series of books. But there's meaning to testament, and it's the same thing as covenant. So we could say this is the Old Covenant and this is the New Covenant. So we're talking about, up until now, in the book of Genesis, we've been talking about the Old Covenant, and specifically one particular covenant, and it has to do with Abraham. It's the covenant, Abrahamic covenant. And that's what started the Jewish people. The first Jew that ever existed was Abraham. And he had a special place, and there's reasons why he did. And the question that I want us to think about is, are there two separate covenants? Are there two separate testaments? Or does one complete the other? Are they tied together? We have them in. I had a young boy to ask me the other day. He says, "Can you buy individual books of the Bible? You know, like the Book of John or the Book of James?" I said, "I've never seen where you can really buy them like that." I said, "You can buy the Old Testament, you can buy the New Testament, or you can buy the Old and New Testament together as one. But I don't know where you can buy any single books." I don't know if you remember this when we were talking about the Bible. In our Old Testament, our Old Covenant that we have, the books that we have 39 books. The Jews have, in the Jewish Bible, I think it's 24 or 26. I'm trying to remember. I think it's 24. But they're the same books. 29, and you say, so how does 24 and 39 work together? If they combine certain books like Ezra, Nehemiah are one book. You might say we have 1st and 2nd Kings, they'll have Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles. Then you'll have the 12. So Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, which are the minor prophets. We have a book for each one, but they call them the 12. So when you put them all together, you can see it's the same books. So their what we call our Old Testament or the Old Covenant has to do with what the Jewish Bible is today. Of course, they don't believe in the New Testament or the New Covenant, and we do. And that's where our faith is based on. It's based on who Jesus Christ is. And he would not be who he was. He would not have come to this earth if it had not have been for the Abrahamic covenant that we're talking about here. And that's the reason my favorite book in the Old Testament is the book of Genesis, far and above anything else. It's one of my most favorite books in the Bible because it tells us a lot of different things. The Old Covenant was ratified by sacrifice, and so was the New Covenant. So, let's look at this. This is kind of review material to get us to where I want to go tonight. The Abrahamic covenant, this is the 4 steps that he went through. He was asked to leave his home, sacrifice animals' blood, sacrifice his blood, and to sacrifice his only son, are the 4 steps. You can find that in the 12th, the 15th, 17th, and 22nd chapters of the book of Genesis. And so that fills out everything that he was asked to do and the promise that he was given. Every time he was asked to do a step, the promise was increased. So he continued until he got to the last one, and that was the final. That's what I'm talking about the completion of the Abrahamic covenant was here when he sacrificed his only son. Every other covenant after this, we talk about the Mosaic covenant or the Mosaic law. All of this comes under the Abrahamic covenant. The covenant with David, King David, was under the Abrahamic covenant. So without the Abrahamic covenant, you wouldn't have had the law. You wouldn't have had the book of Exodus. You wouldn't have had the law that's in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So all of this is tied into the Abrahamic covenant, and that's the reason that the covenant is so important. So we're coming to the end of it in this particular session. Last week or a week before last, however how many weeks it's been, because I lose track after a while, but when we have so many meetings and different things on Wednesday nights, but we talked about Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac, his only son as it said. And I put every subsequent book comes after that is all tied to the Abrahamic covenant. So, is there an Old Testament? Is there Old and New Covenant, or are they both one? Don't have to answer that. And I'm going to go to the 22nd chapter of the book of Genesis to get us over into the 23rd chapter and hopefully get in the direction I want to go. Genesis 22:15. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn." This is the Lord's declaration. Because you have done this thing and have not withheld your only son. He said, because you have not withheld your only son. That statement ties Jesus into what he did. So, and what God did with his son. 17th verse. I will indeed bless you and make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky and the sand of the seashore. Your offspring will possess the gates of their enemies, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by your offspring, because you have obeyed my command. Because Abraham obeyed what God had commanded him to do, all nations of the earth have been blessed, which we know is true. We're blessed because of the covenant with Abraham, because Abraham said yes each time and did what God had told him to do and followed his commands. We are blessed, and the whole world has been blessed because of it. 19th verse in the 22nd chapter. Abraham went back to his young men, and they got up and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham settled in Beersheba. Now, after I'm just going to, this is to help tie it together too. If you remember the last time I talked about the fact that it said he settled in Beersheba, and some Jewish rabbis say that he and Sarah lived apart for the rest of her life, because she died first, and it was because she heard that he had gone to sacrifice their son Isaac. Well, all of this is just conjecture, has nothing, there's no place in the world, any scripture or anything that tells us this, but this is what some of them believe, and I don't believe that. But this said he settled in Beersheba. It says, then, now after these things, Abraham was told, Milcah also has borne sons to your brother Nahor. Okay, now, Haran, Abraham, and Nahor were brothers. There's more in the family than that, but they were brothers. Okay. Milcah was Haran's daughter. So Nahor had children with his niece. That his wife was his niece. Milcah also has borne sons to your brother Nahor. I like these two names here. If anybody have twins, they ought to name them this. It's Uz and Buzz. Uz's firstborn, his brother Buzz. Kemuel, the father of Aram. And it goes through a long list. Then it down to 23rd, down here on the last part of the 22nd verse, it says, and Bethuel. And Bethuel fathered Rebekah. Who is Rebekah? Rebekah wound up being Isaac's wife. You can see all these were tied together. This is all the same family. They were all reproducing within the same family. And they had, remember, Sarah was Abraham's half-sister. So he was married to his sister. His concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore, and it tells the ones that she bore. So it tells all the children, it's telling some of the lineage there of the different ones of Nahor and of Abraham and Haran's daughters and some of his children. Haran's son was Lot, by the way. You know Lot when it's talking about Abraham. Then we go to, from there it goes straight to chapter 23, verse 1. And Sarah lived 127 years. She lived a good long life. These were all the years of her life. Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Then Abraham got up from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. I am a foreign resident among you. Give me a burial site among you so that I can bury my dead. Now remember, this land that he's living on, that Abraham's talking about here, with the people here that were the Hittites, this was land that's promised to Abraham's offspring in the future. But right now, he's in this land. He said, I'm a foreigner in this land. My wife is here. And you couldn't embalm somebody and carry them many miles away, because it wasn't something, well, the pharaohs did. They had petrifying systems. That's not what you did. And for the most part, they didn't dig a grave and put somebody in the grave. You had caves, or caves that were carved out where you buried people. And what most of the time would happen, you would bury somebody in there, and they would decay away. And when it all got down to bones, you'd take the bones and put them in what they call an ossuary, a stone box. You might have a whole family or two families in one ossuary. In fact, several years ago, they came up with this ossuary, and it said, Jesus, the son of Joseph, was listed in this ossuary. And they said, you see, Jesus did die, and he was buried. I said, read a little further. Pay more attention to what you have here. When they took the ossuary and examined it, they found out that inscription was added later. That was somebody counterfeiting something. And what it was, I'm quite sure, is somebody wanted to sell that box, that stone box, to somebody and said, hey, this is the box that Jesus was buried in. And Joseph, his father, and Mary was buried, and this is where all they were buried in, and I'll sell it to you for, you can imagine what they'd ask for something like that. So anyway, he said, and Abram got up from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. He had been there mourning his wife for a while. I am a foreign resident among you. Give me a burial site among you so that I can bury my dead. Now, a map that I showed the last time, this is modern day map, and this was directions. If you want to know how to get from Jerusalem down to Beersheba, you can go out down Highway 6 to get there, because everyone who did this one, that's what they were doing. But you can see from here to Beersheba, there's a shorter route, and it's right here, but it goes through what is now called the West Bank, what is some called Palestinian territory, which is much debated, but regardless of that, the reason I did this map is because this is where it said that Abraham settled. The scripture we just read, this is where Abraham settled. Well, up here, Kiriath Jearim is where Hebron is today. And up here, Jerusalem is Mount Moriah. That's where most everybody believes that Abraham went to sacrifice his son Isaac. So that gives you an idea of one of the reasons I don't think they lived apart is because to get from here to here, you'd have to go through here. So did Abraham take his son with him down here, and his son didn't live with his mom? So there's too many holes in that story. But anyway, you can see how this looks. Here's the Dead Sea up here, the Jordan River up above it. And like I said, this is what they call the occupied West Bank, is what they still refer to it today. And like I said, this is where Mount Moriah would be. This is where it says that they were not here, where they were buried, where he was wanting to bury his wife. And this is where he had lived. This is where they came up from. So I thought I'd do some pictures. I had some of these pictures up here before when we were talking about something else. But this is called the Cave of the Patriarchs, or the Tomb of the Patriarchs. This is in Hebron. This is in what they call the occupied territory. And this is where Abraham and Sarah and all of them are supposedly buried. Now inside you can see I think this is one of these is Isaac, and it tells they have it named which one is which place. We don't know. That was thousands of years ago. But this is the place. This is the way it's decorated inside. And then here's a different view that you can see. It's a pretty magnificent place they built there around these tombs. This one is supposed to be Abraham's, and this one's supposed to be Sarah's. Now, I can't read that, so I can't tell you that's what it says. But that's what it's supposed to be. That's the place that we're talking about, where Abraham was making a deal to buy some land for a burial place for him and his family. 23:3. Then Abraham got up from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. I am a foreign resident among you. Give me a burial site among you so that I can bury my dead. Verse 5. The Hittites replied to Abraham, listen to us, Lord. You are God's chosen one among us. Did you catch that? They knew. Now how they knew that, I have no idea. But that's what they said. You are God's chosen one among us. Bury your dead in our finest burial place. None of us will withhold from you his burial place for burying your dead. And I want to follow this through because it's interesting to me, and it might not be to you. 7th verse. Then Abraham rose and bowed down to the Hittites, the people of the land. He said to them, if you are willing for me to bury my dead, listen to me and ask Ephron, son of Zohar, on my behalf to give me the cave of Machpelah. That's the place we just looked at. That belongs to him. It is at the end of his field. Let him give it to me in your presence for the full price. So he's not saying, give this to me. They say, we'll give you any land you want. And he's saying, give it to me, but for the full price as a burial place. Now, Ephron shows up, the one that owns this land. Ephron was sitting among the Hittites. So in the presence of all the Hittites who came to the gate of his city, Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham, no, my Lord, listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Okay, so he's offering to give it to him, right? Now watch these negotiations here. Abraham bowed down to the people and to the land of the land and said to Ephron in the presence of the people of the land, please listen to me. Let me pay the price of the field. Accept it from me and let me bury my dead there. So Abraham said, I'll buy whatever it is, but ask Ephron if I can buy that. Ephron said, I'll give you what you want of that. And Abraham comes back and he says, I'm going to pay you for that land. I want to pay you for that land. And I love the way Ephron answers him here in the next verse. Ephron answered Abraham and said to him, my Lord, listen to me. Land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Bury your dead. You see what he did? You see what he just did? He said, take this land. He said, it's only worth 400. shekels. He said, why should that be anything between us? Abraham agreed with Ephraim, and Abraham weighed out to Ephraim the silver that he had agreed to in the presence of the Hittites. 400 shekels of silver at the current commercial rate. So through all their negotiations, all the things that they were doing, going back and forth in, he wound up paying for this land. And I like the way Ephraim put that. That's no big deal. What would that be between us? So he was telling him, if you're going to get, yeah, he said, this land, I'm willing to give you this money, but $400, 400 shekels, what's that between friends like us? Yes, when you were over in Okinawa and you visited Japan where your grandfather, didn't you say your mom would dicker with the people at the marketplace? You didn't just go to the grocery store. Yeah.
I had clients from other countries when they came in, they would try to dicker with me. I said, this is my price. My brother will do for this much. I said, I'll let your brother do it. Not what you do.
I had an Indian client of mine had bought several stuff from me for years. This is back 40 years ago, I guess now. And he came in, he was buying something else. I said, and I knew what I wanted to sell it for, and I knew you had to start higher because he was going to beat you down on it. So we negotiated back and forth. I got down to the figure that I stopped, and I said, I'm sorry, that's it. That's it. He said, all the business I've done with you, and you're going to treat me like this? I said, let me make this simple. You pay that or you go somewhere else. He said, I'll take it. But he had to go through the process. So that was all part of it. So he paid the commercial price for the land. Then I'm skipping chapter 24 because I don't want to cover it all together because it's important. All of them are important, but that's a little different. Genesis 25:1. Now Abraham had taken another wife whose name was Keturah, and she bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. But think about it now. How old is Abraham? And he was 100 when Isaac was born. So now Isaac has gotten on up in age, and Sarah has died, and she was 140, 127. 127. So he was about 140 at this time. And it said he'd taken another wife whose name was Keturah, and she had all these children. Then the 5th verse says, Abraham gave everything he owned to Isaac, and Abraham gave gifts to the sons of his concubines, but while he was still alive, he sent them eastward away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Why did Abraham do this? He's the son of the promise. Technically, Ishmael was the firstborn. Isaac was the firstborn, his only son. He was the son of the promise, so he did not want them to be. The inheritance went to Isaac, period. He gave gifts to all the rest of them, and he sent them away. It still doesn't answer the question, but it says here, Abraham had taken another wife, it says, whose name was Keturah. Had taken another wife. Who exactly was Keturah? And why did Abraham marry her? And why did he have 6 more kids? And was she his wife or was she his concubine? And what's the difference? Genesis 25:1 that we just read says wife. 1 Chronicles 1:32 says Abraham's concubine, Keturah. So was she his concubine or his wife? Now we're going to get a little bit off into Jewish tradition and what some of their rabbis say, because there's no way to know for sure with this. First, let me define something. A wife is a wife like we have today. You marry this wife, marries this husband, and they're a couple, and they're coupled together, supposed to be for life, and they have, if they have offspring, it's for both of them, and so on. But at that time, if you took a lesser wife, she's not of the same caliber and the same class as this one, they were considered a concubine. So a concubine, it wasn't just a mistress. She couldn't have affairs with 4 or 5 different other people. Once she became his concubine, she was his wife, but she was a lesser wife, is the best way I can explain it. So when it says concubine, like it says, Solomon had 300 wives and 600 concubines. So you know he was not the wisest man of all time, regardless of what it said. He was not that wise, but had 600 concubines. So these are all wives. Most of those were political wives, that you married a wife from this country or this country to create a union between your 2 countries. So anyway, here she is. She's white, but who is she? So, Rabbi Solomon ben Isaac. Shlomo Yitzhak. Yitzhak is the Hebrew name that's Isaac, known as Rashi. So from now on, when I refer to him, we'll call him Rashi. That's a lot easier than all the rest of this. Based on an acronym of his Hebrew initials, is one of the most influential Jewish commentators in history. He was born in Trey, Champagne, in northern France in 1040. So his teachings have been around for a long time. And this is what he says about Keturah. Rashi tells us that Keturah was one and the same as Hagar, whom Abraham had married more than 50 years prior, when he was 85 years of age, and who bore his firstborn Ishmael. And according to, if you read his writings and some other of the Jewish rabbis of the day, of that particular time, they say Isaac was the one that was instrumental in bringing Hagar back into the fold and joining him back with his father. Now this is just me here, okay? Nowhere in the scripture does it specify at what period of time these 6 children were born. It sounds like he married Keturah. Well, if he was married to Hagar, he already had one son by that. When did he marry Keturah? Did he marry Keturah when Sarah was still living? Did he have 6 children with her while Sarah was still living? Was that another concubine? Was that his concubine as well? That was Hagar? We don't know. There's no way. All this is possible, but this is what the this particular Jewish teacher says. And some say that Hagar was his concubine, that she became Keturah, his wife, after the death of Sarah. So she was a concubine who became his wife, and that would explain in the scripture why part of the time it says wife, part of the time it says concubine. Does that mean that's true? And what's my question? Does it matter? It doesn't matter to us at all. And why would Abraham have more children? Why would he want to have more children? He knows the promises through Isaac. He already has Ishmael, who God said, I'm going to bless him and make him of many nations. And Isaac is going to be the one of the promise. Why would he want to have more children? And we'll say Rav, I'm not going to try to pronounce his first name. He was making a speech, this is back in the 80s. He was talking to a group of Jewish young people in Miami, and he said this: my beloved children, the souls of 1.5 million Jewish children murdered in the Holocaust are floating in the air above us. Your task is to give those souls bodies to live in. There are groups that call them, that say they're Christians, and I won't name which ones, that believe that there's all our souls, all of our spirits were created in heaven. And all of our spirits were floating around in heaven until a body was born into the world, and that spirit was connected with this body. Now, do I believe that? No. There's nothing scriptural about that whatsoever. But that's the way he's talking here. And this is a Jewish rabbi, a well-known Jewish rabbi. Here's what the Talmud says. The Talmud is, for lack of a better term, it's a commentary on the Torah, on the Jewish Old Testament. It says, the son of David, Moshiach, and that means Messiah, will not arrive until all the souls in the treasury in heaven are brought into this world. So the Talmud says what he's pointing to up here when he's talking about all these souls floating around from the Holocaust, that they have to have bodies to come down here in, and then down here the Talmud. So for years, how many different Christian denominations are there? I have no idea how to count them. How many different beliefs are there among all those different? And they have all different kinds of doctrines. There's different kinds of things. Some we believe, some we don't believe. Some of the simple things here are eternal security. In other words, once saved, always saved. You can fall from grace as Free Will Baptist. Your predestination. Just around this area, we have three major differences between Baptists. This is just Baptists. This is not talking about Presbyterians and Episcopalians and all the rest of them. So there's a lot of different beliefs out there. Some of them hold water and some don't. I don't think this does. Regardless of how old it is and regardless of whether it's in the Talmud, it's not in the Jewish Hebrew scriptures. It's not in our Bibles. So I don't think that's true. But I thought that was interesting, the way that they look at that and the way he saw that as them. Had anybody ever heard that from any other? Because I've heard Christian groups that taught that. There's no way to know why Abraham wanted more children. What this particular teacher was saying was the reason Abraham wanted more children is because in the beginning when God created Adam and Eve, he said, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. That's what he was telling them. So Abraham was about the business of doing more replenishing of the earth. I don't know if it had anything to do with it or not, but that's what he said. I do not agree with the concept of heavenly bodies that are brought down to here into our bodies. What is important? What's the thing that's really important? Genesis 25:6. And Abraham gave gifts to the sons of his concubines. But while he was, notice it says his concubines. But while he was still alive, he sent them eastward away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. That's what's important, is the covenant that comes through Isaac. Any questions?